Welcome back to Today and Tomorrow, the podcast where we explore the ideas shaping our world and the people daring to think beyond it. Today's conversation takes us somewhere a little bit higher and perhaps a little further than usual. We're turning our gaze upward, quite literally, to see how the lessons we learn from space can change the way we lead, we innovate, and we grow here on Earth. It's about vision, it's about courage, and what happens when we look at life through a wider lens. To be honest, that reaches a little bit beyond our day to day orbit. And to help us unpack, I'm of course not alone as always. And as always, again, a wonderful welcome, first of all, to Dieter. Dieter, nice to have you here again.
Well, it's absolutely great again, and especially with our really special guest. We just recapped that we know each other for 3 or 4 years now, and we always talked about the world beyond our borders. Because Shelli, I made the experience that she is an absolute expert in the space sector, and she was really living up to promoting the space idea, and now she has opened a new chapter and create. You're more busy now than you have been before, and absolutely great to have you here again. That you have your time and to find more about the newest trend in space and how it shapes our world here on the Earth.
So nice to have you here. Shelly, would you like to introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to join you again. It's always a pleasure. Dieter and I go back several years. Alex, it's wonderful to meet you. And I'm Shelli Brunswick. I'm a global futurist, strategist, as well as an author and speaker, primarily from the space industry, but really talking now about the emerging technology and where things are going in the future. So that includes the future of work, how things could change. And as you highlighted, yes, we can talk about space, but we can also talk about how space technology is solving our greatest challenges here on Earth. So I look forward to a riveting discussion with both of you.
Shelly, your career has spanned from the US Air Force, leadership at Space Foundation, and now you're running SP Global. Was there a particular moment when you realized that your purpose was to inspire others through the mindset of space?
Over my career journey, I've met a lot of young people and professionals. And one of the things that really stuck with me, especially when I was the chief operating officer at Space Foundation, is after I would give a talk, people would come up to me and say, "Oh, I loved your talk. It was so inspirational. Do you have this written down?" Well, as you know, when you have a full-time job and you're a C-level at a company, it's really hard to write things. Dieter, I know you have your future book coming out. So being an author is very challenging, but I just felt at that time, it was time to make that pivot into being an entrepreneur, really being that motivational speaker and starting to write things down, which I've now written 2 books. The first book is called What Space Got to Do with It, 10 Life Lessons for Personal Growth. And the second book is called What Space Got to Do with It, An Interstellar Guide to Success. And it's where I started writing those things down, not just a story of my journey, but actually how you can accomplish your own goals and objectives, no matter what industry you're in. And that was the pivotal moment for me 2 years ago.
It sounds wonderful. And you said it, you look back at a lot of experience in aerospace and leadership. You wrote it down. But what cosmic lesson or cosmic life lesson would you share with your younger self to say it like that? Because this could be the core of how you tick and how we can introduce you to our audience.
Well, thank you. Well, I was in the United States Air Force and I did space acquisition. And one of the things we learned in the Air Force was you should always leave a job better than you found it. And you should always create what we called a continuity book, where you would write out things, how the job worked, how you would leave it. So when the next person comes in, they would have that continuity book and they could continue on with the mission and build on it. And so that's really what these books and the series is about, is writing down that information. So many times our senior thought leaders, they have wonderful careers and then they go off to retire and enjoy time with their families and so on. And they do wonderful things, but they don't necessarily write down that continuity book, that knowledge transfer. And so I'm really at a point in my journey where I'm out there trying to motivate the next generation, but also not only am I writing down my knowledge transfer, I'm interviewing over 200 global thought leaders, and in each book, I'm including their insights in that book, in those chapters. They are not necessarily in space. They're global thought leaders, they're entrepreneurs, they're investors, former presidents of countries, writing down their knowledge transfer. I interviewed somebody this week, and he even said to me, part of the reason I'm doing this is I know that my story and information needs to get written down so it'll get shared with others. So not only am I sharing it for myself, but I'm sharing it for others.
So what's space got to do with it?
You know, most people, when they think about space, they think about going to the moon or onto Mars. But really, what I like to highlight is how space is really part of our everyday life here on Earth. You know, right now we're using a platform, a telecommunications platform. And I always highlight that telecommunications came from the Apollo program. It was how NASA talked to the astronauts. So in a way, we're building on that great technology of being able to talk to astronauts in space. And today, that's how we're bringing this program to your audience today.
And your book is built around four pillars: leadership, awareness, access, and action. How do those interact with each other? And which one would you say are people struggling the most with in practice?
It always starts with leadership first. And in this case, it's self-leadership, knowing yourself, doing a SWOT analysis on yourself. What are your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? And then what are you interested in? Where do you want to go? So you know what your goals and vision are, what you need to do to improve, and where you can take advantage of those opportunities. So once you do chapter 1, which is really that self-leadership, then it opens up the other chapters. And so I'm going to use an example. The European Space Agency has a tech transfer office, as so does the US and Japan, where there are patents that have come in from the space industry that are waiting to be commercialized. So you now have self-leadership. Let's say you want to be an entrepreneur and you're still in ideation, or you might have an idea. What you could do is you could go to the NASA Tech Transfer Office or the ESA Tech Transfer Office, see what they have available. Maybe they've already got some technology. You could apply for the patent, but you now know that because you've done that initial self-leadership. You now have the awareness that this opportunity exists. The next step is to create that access point. So now I've just shared there's a website, there's opportunities, there's materials you can do. And then the last step is to take action. Actually do something. Reach out to somebody from that tech transfer office, ask them for help, find some training on how to do it. And so that's how the book flows. It really gives you that process over those four main pillars.
We now talked about what the impact on our on Earth is, or on the ground is. Let's go in what's happening in the space right now, because that's something I'm really interested in. So we definitely should talk about that. What is happening right now? Besides that, the US is preparing to return to the moon, and Elon Musk is targeting for Mars. Everybody, I think, has heard about that. So, what are the specific trends in developing space? Is there a hotel in orbit in a few years, as some people are promising? Or, well, please tell us.
Absolutely. Well, first, I want to say that it's not just the U.S. returning to the moon. There's more than 50 partners that have signed the Artemis Accord to be part of that program, because no one nation, no one country can do space alone. It's very expensive and it's still dangerous. So yes, the U.S., along with its Artemis partners, are returning to the moon. And then the goal is to someday go on to Mars. But I do want to highlight, we're already on Mars. We're just on Mars with robots and artificial intelligence and autonomous data. So all the autonomous cars here on Earth, they got nothing on those rovers that are on Mars already, that are already searching Mars and looking for life on Mars, that are doing autonomous navigation and decision-making and artificial intelligence, already doing that on Mars. So I think what you mean is at some point, will we send humans to Mars? Absolutely. But I think beyond those parts of returning to the moon and what's the business case for that, and then on to Mars, is really what is the business case? Because what we've learned over the last 50 years from the Apollo era, which was primarily government-led, government employees, is we're pivoting to this different model of space exploration. And it's really the commercialization opportunities of space, the cislunar economy. We think about telecommunications and Earth observation for weather forecasting, agriculture, mass transportation, logistics systems. So right now, on average, you're probably communicating with a satellite 45 times a day. So those satellites have to be put in orbit. But what's beyond that? The things we're learning from the International Space Station, such as we're looking at doing pharmaceutical development and biotechnology. An amazing woman I know, Nicole Wagner, she is a doctor and she's designing to cure macular degeneration, which is a disease that happens to older people where they eventually lose their sight. And there is no cure right now. And she is looking to print a protein lens that you could eventually replace your eye lens with, which would give you back your sight. Now, the challenge is printing protein lenses on Earth has a lot of challenges because of gravity. So what she's done is partnered with NASA to 3D print that in space and then return it. So it's really not a space product. We're using space because it enables a better product, lower waste, better quality that can then be used. And so she's going to be entering FDA trials here in the US in the next year or so. So eventually we may have a cure for macular degeneration, but this is just one type of technology. People are looking at studying Parkinson's disease, heart disease, cancers. You could do pharmaceutical development, all looking at that microgravity environment. So that's just one area. There's also opportunities for in-space manufacturing. Instead of taking payloads from Earth, which one of the biggest challenges is getting out of Earth's gravity. But if you can already be in microgravity doing in space manufacturing. So for instance, there are some companies, we have a thing called orbital debris, where we're kind of junking up our low Earth orbit with a lot of orbital debris of old satellites and particulates and things. Well, there are some companies that are looking at, one, can they put gas stations in space that could resurface satellites so that it extends satellites' lifespan? Because once a satellite launches with its current fuel supply and it runs out of fuel, it's done. But if you could resurface that satellite, it has a much longer life extension. So there are companies that are looking at putting refueling stations in space, as well as there are companies that are looking at that orbital debris or defunct satellites and how could they take that, recycle it, repurpose it, and remanufacture it. So that's just the start of what manufacturing in space could look like for the future. And I'll kind of pause there, but there's a lot of exciting things going on.
Well, there is, uh, when you mentioned that, this brings me to a conversation we had way back when, 3 years ago, when we were all talking about space mining. What is a big issue too? But the problem there was, and still is, from my understanding, is how to bring these resources out of space. You just can't dump it. I mean, this would be disastrous. So when you were talking about manufacturing, that's a lot easier because these contact lenses, they are not really big, not heavy, so you can bring them back on Earth quite easily. Other products, it is not as easy, and especially with these very heavy resources we mine in space, the limits or the problems are much severe. And is there a solution to it? Do you see a solution to that?
Well, there are a lot of great minds looking at that. And, that is one of the things that entrepreneurs are really good at. Entrepreneurs can see a problem and they figure out how to solve that problem. So I challenge all your entrepreneurs out there. And there are several entrepreneurs that are working on this challenge, as well as several entrepreneurs that are looking at space mining, especially asteroids, when you think about water and minerals. And a lot of that can also be, can we do that on the moon? We do a lot of things on Earth where we take resources from the Earth to space. Now the goal is instead, make it, don't take it. So as we look to put those lunar facilities on the moon, can we now use lunar resources or asteroid mining to develop the technology we need to continue to go on to Mars, as well as explore the solar system? And I do want to highlight that exploration of the solar system is still very important because we are a giant rock in this solar system, and we are impacted by things in this solar system. The sun sends off solar winds. I mean, if you think about the planet Mars, part of the reason it doesn't have a robust atmosphere is a lot of its atmosphere was stripped off by those solar winds. We on the Earth, we have an iron core, we have an orbit, so we have magnetic field that protects us from those solar winds. But we need to understand that solar uh, weather because it impacts our satellites, it impacts our technology. Some of those solar winds have taken out some of the Starlink satellites as well. So as well as we have meteorites and other things that could impact the Earth. As we recall from the stories we heard, that's what happened to the dinosaurs. An asteroid hit the Earth, it wiped out the dinosaurs. So it's really important that we are, as humanity, paying attention to what's happening in our environment in space so that we are prepared for those activities. And NASA and other organizations like ESA have created programs like DART, which is to redirect redirect asteroids that could be coming into the Earth. So it's a Earth protection system. So it is important that we do that research as well as the commercialization side. So I wanted to highlight that there are roles both for the government as well as industry beyond the government doing just oversight.
We were talking about technology, we were talking about wonderful innovations, about the role of the government, and about a lot of foresight thinkers. And you often talk about cultivating a space mindset. What defines that way of thinking? Why it's so relevant, especially in an era of AI and uncertainty we have nowadays?
So what I call a space mindset is really like a growth mindset. A lot of times we can put blinders up and we can say, well, that's not possible, or I can't do that, or nobody's done that before. But when you think about space pioneers and entrepreneurs, they really look beyond that. Henry Ford once said, if I asked somebody what they wanted, they would have told me they wanted a faster horse. They wouldn't have thought they could have had a car. So as entrepreneurs and innovators and space mindset, we're thinking about what humanity needs that might be the next leap in technology, that somebody might say, I just need a faster horse. But when we think about space travel, right now we think about airplanes and we're all like, this is great. But there are innovators out there who are thinking about point to point transfer from one spaceport to another where you could be there in a relatively short time. And there are spaceports around the world that are being developed. Yes, there are some in the US, but more than half are international. And so point to point transfer might be the next step in travel beyond just the airplanes we think about.
You were talking about the future, and as a futurist, how do you imagine the next decade of activity, of innovation, of business, of sustainability, of education? What's your vision of the futures out there?
Well, I love to talk about space, but I think it's really important to talk that space is part of being an enabler. And it's part of all the other emerging technologies. We talked a little bit, about biotech already. I could talk about energy and energy solutions, that space technology, whether it's, launching solar panels in orbit or mining helium-3 on the moon. Space intersects that. Space intersects cybersecurity and AI and robotics. And so space is part of that enabler of these emerging technologies. I'm sure, as you and many of your fellow guests have talked about, artificial intelligence is a big unlocker of some of this innovation as it relates to space technology as well. And you even said, what's the future of work look like? Space technology, AI, quantum. We even talked before we started recording, what does the future of learning look like? In the next 20 years, is it going to a classroom and having a teacher, or is a lot of it large language models and learning online? And you still will have professors and resources because you still need humans in the loop to talk to beyond that. But education is going to change dramatically, as well as space technology allows education in places that we may not have it, because technology provides telework, telehealth, teleeducation because of satellite infrastructure. So again, satellites and space technology is the developer of technology, but it's also an enabler of technology.
I love to travel. And you didn't answer my little remark about hotels in space. So, when will we be able just to have discount travel at least into the orbit?
Absolutely. So when we think about how travel started in the beginning, it used to be traveling salesmen would drive around, they'd stay at a hotel, they'd sell. I mean, that's how it worked. Then there were airplanes and they could fly in airplanes, and hotels would spring up around airports. When they drove, hotels sprang up on those driving routes. Here in the US, there's a famous historic route called Route 66. But then as people started flying, the major airports started popping up with hotels, Hilton and Marriott and IHG. Absolutely. As we look at the eventual, commercial space station, so no longer an international space station run by a government, but commercial space stations that may have part of it for in-space manufacturing. The governments will still have a role where they're doing scientific research, but also parts of it could be where people travel to space. I mean, we have seen in Israel, they paid for a commercial astronaut, Eaton Stibbe, he's in the second book, to go to the International Space Station where he did 37 some experiments that came in through a contest that was done. So the ability to pay private citizens and nonprofits pay for somebody to go to the International Space Station has already paved the way for private citizens to go to space. I see a lot of space companies that have done a lot of solicitation for astronauts as well. And so the next step is beyond the International Space Station. What are those space stations that will develop? And then who are the hotel partners? Now, one of the things I know is that Hilton, they're known for their wonderful chocolate chip cookies when you walk into their lobby. They did send those cookies to the International Space Station to be baked in space to see how they would react in microgravity environment. So is the first one that pops up a Hilton? I don't know. But I do say that wherever people travel, the infrastructure that supports that travel, from the rockets that will take you there, the food, the restaurants, you got to eat there. Nobody's going to want to just eat meals ready to eat out of a little bag. And you're going to have a place to sleep. So that is part of the infrastructure that will develop with this cislunar economy.
But if you talk about the infrastructure, it's all about collaboration, isn't it?
Absolutely. First of all, space is still very expensive. And it still does have challenges. It is rocket science. So there are a lot of parts and pieces that have to go into safety, sustainability, and those things are happening, as well as the next step. So we are beyond that place where the government runs it and it's, risk avoidance. We're now entering that industrialization phase and commercialization phase of space. And really, we've been, as government agencies, in low Earth orbit for 60 years. I mean, Sputnik. So the real question is, at what point does the government leave that, just like thinking patrolling the seas, and they provide Space Force, just like the Navy provides safe passage on the high seas, and allow that cislunar economy, low Earth orbit, to develop commercially. And then again, the government has a role to help develop the next phase of our development in space.
I have a little bit of a mind experience for you. Let's imagine we have a new era of space travel. We're on Mars, and you're giving a TED talk on Mars tomorrow to inspire the future generations, to inspire everyone out there. What would be your opening line?
That is excellent. Join us on the red planet where today is really tomorrow. So I have to say, Mars is a exciting prospect. There's no doubt in my mind that humanity will eventually be there. But there is a lot of technology that has to be developed that goes along with it beyond the rockets. Food sources, water purification. Mars is far more challenging than the moon. I mean, the moon is, you could leave and come back to Earth relatively quickly. Mars is a whole nother story. I'm sure many of your audience have seen the movie The Martian. There are a number of challenges with that. But there are a lot of companies here on Earth that are looking to solve those challenges for the Mars as well as on Earth. I know a woman who's a Mars-catect. Everyone thinks we're just going to live in lava tubes and live underground. But for humanity, the psychological impact of living underground long-term, 4 years, could have a major toll. And so she looks at, what does architecture really look like as we move to Mars and live there for long periods of time, years, if not decades. But she's also taking that technology and using it here on Earth and working with countries that have austere environments, deserts, for instance. Could that Mars technology also help transform how desert living is? So I share, or growing food. We're going to have to grow food inside on Mars with no water, no dirt. Can we do that here on Earth? Well, absolutely we can. We can increase crop yields, reduce the need for water and soil, and put those closer to population centers so that individuals closer, are the food sources closer to them. And one of the people I think Dieter and I both know is Deborah Walliser, who has a company called Got Produce that helps companies that are remote, countries that may have a difficulty growing fresh produce, such as desert environments. She's helping them use some of the technology she learned when she was in college and got a grant from NASA to do hydroponic studies to grow food in space. So I share with you a lot of what we're going to learn about Mars. We're already going to use that here on Earth. So tomorrow may be Mars, but today it's here on Earth.
Well, we already have the concept of vertical farming. I mean, that it goes directly into this direction where you can use a fraction of space for growing much more food with a fraction of water and energy. So these concepts first on space and then back on Earth, but I'm not sure if that is when we have to solve the climate issues that obviously are coming up. I think we need to be much faster in this issue. So I think it will be space and Earth at almost parallel on the same time.
I absolutely agree. And for your audience, there's an organization called the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, and they have a document out called Space 2030. And for your audience, many of them may be aware of the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 Sustainable Development Goals that the United Nations agreed to in 2015 that we would achieve by 2030. Being that this is the end of 2025, we are kind of falling short of reaching those goals. But I do want to highlight that in that United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, Space Agenda 2030, they highlight how space is an enabler for those 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So I think there's a real place for innovators and entrepreneurs to solve those great challenges here on Earth, and space could be part of the infrastructure and technology that does that.
Well, it definitely will. If you see how the importance that space or the space industry already has gained and the effort that is invested by even little countries like Luxembourg, somebody who is not interested in this field will be surprised that Luxembourg is one of the pacemakers in space mining, really. So the industry already has gained lots of momentum, and I think this will increase to all of our benefits as we share the hope here.
I think let's talk about Luxembourg a little bit and why they've been so successful, because they really don't have per se a space program, a spaceport, but what they did that any country can really think about is they put in the infrastructure of policies and the framework to allow space companies to flourish. And even in the United States, we're catching up. But because our space industry has been protracted by 60 years, a lot of different agencies run parts of the space industry. And so it's not as streamlined. And what Luxembourg did is they made a very streamlined process to allow companies to incorporate in Luxembourg to be successful. They've partnered with their universities for degrees. So they've been very successful. And I share that with other nations that want to be part of the space industry or emerging space nations, that Luxembourg is a great case study in how they created that strategic leadership and framework to allow space to flourish.
Well, if we're talking about Luxembourg, of course, via SAS, the satellite company, they of course had a head start, and they ran into the problem that their model of satellite business had to be transformed to the next level in order not to become marginalized. So I think this explains why their attempt on developing their space sector.
Absolutely. And SES also has a U.S. division as well, and very competitive here in the United States. So they are very successful. And again, that highlights where do companies want to incorporate their main office. And so we're seeing a globalization of companies in Japan and Malaysia, Singapore, Europe as well. that's where their headquarters is. And then they look at where does their second office go in, because as we've talked about, space is very international. Where are those venture capitalists? Where are the partners you want to connect with? A lot of them are still in the United States, in Silicon Valley, so to say. And they're still opening maybe a second office somewhere in the United States to tap into that funding source as well. So it is still, although we're talking about maybe Luxembourg or the US, the space industry is still very global. Companies are still very global, working across different countries to create the environment we want for the future.
But what would be your wish when we talk about environment for the future? If we look at Luxembourg, if we look at every one we were talking about, what would you say would be the biggest mission for the next 2 to 5 years, or even 10 years, we should accomplish to really start forward into the future we were talking about?
So where it becomes a little more challenging with space than perhaps navigating the high seas is right now, everything that's launched into orbit still belongs to a country. So if something launches in the US and it's flagged in the US, even if something falls off, it belongs to the United States. So there's no salvage rights in space. So we have a lot of challenges with still the space policy, space law, space diplomacy. So for your listeners, in addition to entrepreneurs solving great challenges, we need a lot of diplomats, we need a lot of international affairs, space lawyers to help us navigate this global complexity that's not only on Earth, but going to be off Earth. So we talk about what happens on the moon. You have a space station, I have a research facility. How do we collaborate? What happens when two people want to get married or have a child? And what citizenship is that child? And so there's all kinds of legal things that we don't think about beyond just the normal, I want to create a research center on the moon. Data rights, who owns the data rights? What about privacy information that's being housed off planet? So there's a lot of things that we need space lawyers, international affairs, policymakers to think about. And so again, the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs has a great thing where they do bring space lawyers together. They talk about these activities throughout the year. So in addition to entrepreneurs, where there's lots of great programs for you, there's a lot of great programs and get-togethers for space lawyers to talk about how do we create the policies that we need for the future so that we as humanity can go on to the moon and Mars and beyond.
So what I learned so far is that the term moonstruck becomes a completely different meaning now.
Exactly.
But let's talk to another issue, and that is the litter and the old satellites, and they really turn into a problem. And some scientists are really drawing very pessimistic pictures of what's going to happen. Either that we get bumped on Earth by old satellite parts, or that even our atmosphere can be intoxicated in the near future. So how can we solve this issue? I think this will become more and more burning the more active we become in space.
Absolutely. So there are several challenges, and especially people in South America are dealing with a lot of the orbital debris does come into that Pacific region and then come up parts of the South American coastline and then pollutes their fishing waters. And so there are a number of great experts that can talk about that. And I'll leave that to those experts to further delineate the challenges of orbital debris, especially coming in to the oceans and then proliferating. And then we also have to look at what does happen to our atmosphere as rockets go up, as rockets and orbital debris comes in. And then we also have to look at what happens to that low Earth orbit. There's it's a phenomenon that could happen that if orbital debris impacts other orbital debris, do we eventually create so much orbital debris that we can no longer get off the planet? And then we're going to go back hundreds of years, right? No more telecommunications, no more satellite TV, all of these things. Our telecommunications, we're going to have to run everything on fiber optics. It would greatly change the way the world is. So there's a number of challenges that have to be evaluated. And a lot of that starts with those leaders that are in policy. Because although it's a global issue, each country has to look at it individually. Each country has their own laws and procedures and policies, but we do have to have collaboration. So UNUSA, the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, is one of those organizations that can bring those countries together. The U.S. has done some of that with the Artemis Accords for these are guidelines, how we'll work together in space. But we do really have to think about how do we prevent an orbital debris disaster that prevents us from leaving the planet. Again, that would set back technology immensely. And then we wouldn't have to worry about rockets re-entering the atmosphere because we can't get out of the atmosphere. So those are some things we have to think about in the near term. U.S. Space Force, other space agencies are talking about the challenge of orbital debris, civil space agencies, and then even commercial. But the challenge with commercial is there's still not a lot of regulation that governs how commercial companies will operate in space. And through my book series and the individuals I've interviewed around the world, they're all saying they really need policies and procedures that create a level playing field for all commercial companies to operate successfully. We're still a little bit in the Wild West, which is a term here in the United States, the Wild West, where we don't have a lot of policies and procedures in place yet that allow space access for all entrepreneurship opportunities.
Well, space cowboys.
Space cowboys. There's still a lot of space cowboys. We are moving a little bit out of that into trying to set some policies and procedures so that we can have more of that space commercialization and creating that cislunar economy and economic development.
So there's a lot going on, but we also have a lot of work to do, to sum it up in a short form.
Exactly. And what we need to do is make sure people are writing it down so that the next generation doesn't have to start from zero. That's the other part. We need to be going to conferences, we need to be writing papers, we need to be writing it down so that thought leaders can be building on each other's ideas and supporting the space industry and putting our voice and insights out there into the ether so that we can communicate this technology, these ideas, so that we can come up with real solutions.
Well, thank you, Shelli. And I'm doing the same thing, even if this is an older book and the new one is coming up. And yes,
I will not pick up my 5 books now. I will not do this. No. But yeah, no, those were wonderful final words. Thank you very much for the insights. We really appreciate this. It was a wonderful talk.
Well, thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you around the galaxy.
So, dear listeners, dear viewers, today this conversation reminded us that space isn't just out there in the cosmos. It's also a mindset that we can bring into everything we do. Shelley's perspective on leadership, courage, turning awareness into action, all those wonderful examples show us how we have to learn, what lessons we can explore, whether in the orbit or in life, that can help us move forward with purpose. So, if today's discussion didn't spark anything in you, well, maybe you should listen to it again. But to be honest, you will. And we had the promotion, and I will do it again because I wrote it down in my outro. You will find out more about her work in the books and in everything else. We will put in the links into the episode notes so you can find more about Shelli and her work. So, again, thank you very much for your time again, and thank you very much for the wonderful insights.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to join you.
And of course, Dieter, thank you for your time again and to have you along on this journey.
well, it's always a pleasure. I said it before, especially with guests like Shelli. So I will try to do my best to bring in more guests like her.
And this was a new episode of Today and Tomorrow. If you liked the episode, please follow us, share, and subscribe to our channels. We will see each other with Dieter promised it, so it will happen. Wonderful new guests in the next episodes. From my side, and as always, the final words go to Dieter. I say it was a pleasure, and thank you, ciao, and goodbye.
Tschüss.